I'd heard that humans were different, but now I know far more than I want to. I was stationed on a research orbital in the Jikin system, which, at that time, was right on the frontier of controlled space. We were studying a protoplanet in the hopes that we could extract resources from the large body of matter, which our financiers were betting would be easier and more cost-effective than having to extract them on a fully formed planet. I was working spectral analysis, an important job for this type of mission, when I met my first human, Adelaide. Humans had their species debut not too long prior, having discovered FTL travel and gaining the attention of the greater celestial community, which wasted no time in welcoming the new species. Their graduation to FTL-capable society was a notable event, as it was the first new addition to our ranks in Zero, 5.1 Demetern, which, as an interesting aside, I later found out was approximately 240 human years, which, with their shorter lifespans, is approximately 8 generations of humans, and there was understandable significant public interest. They passed all the initial investigations and were happily assigned a compatible sentient species designation, CSS 6.056. So unexpected was their reveal that for the longest time you could hardly read a periodical or watch a broadcast without some mention of the new species, though most of the information was far from reliable. Like most at that time, I had some small interest, but as I was working so far from the center of things, I knew any curiosity I had about these humans would likely have to wait until I actually met one. Still, the articles and info pieces I'd seen so far painted an interesting enough picture. Bipedal mammals. That alone made them a curiosity, without having to go into some of the more sensational claims, and now I was going to be cohabiting with one. As I'm sure you can understand, I was quite pleased to have the opportunity to get to know this interesting new species much sooner than I had expected. A notice was sent to all crew advising that Human Adelaide was joining the mission as a junior metals analyst, which was unusual as this position was not budgeted for and had not been required in the initial planning brief, not to mention joining partway through the mission. Everyone was full of questions about the situation and the new crew member themselves. Why were they traveling so far to join partway through a rather mundane mission? Did we need to plan for any special conditions for the human? What did this mean for the budget? What if they could read minds? This was asked by Assistant Sub-Manager Gurley, prompted by an article they had read in a less than reputable publication, and so could safely be ignored. The executive had seen fit to provide a summary of information about humans to our orbital's internal data net, so most of the questions could have been avoided with minimal reading, but being so far from anything interesting, no one wanted to miss an opportunity for some light gossip. In any event, I trusted the executive's summary far more than the tabloids for the simple matter that they had a financial incentive to be accurate. Always reassuring. It was dry but interesting reading, though it rather aggravatingly prompted more questions than it answered. In brief, humans were described as a robust, adaptive species which hailed from a higher-than-standard gravity planet under a yellow star. They had limited spectrum binocular vision, keen hearing, were endothermal, and extracted their energy needs via a relatively simple omnivorous digestion system. Nothing too untoward there, but I did wonder, having it confirmed by the summary as they were bipedal mammals. No depiction of a tail? What exactly constitutes robust? I would have thought that all evolved species could be considered adaptive, so why does this require mentioning specifically? Being omnivorous was unusual enough, though not exactly rare, but paired with a digestive system? How would that work? Most digestive-styled systems break down their matter by rotting the plant or meat matter and absorbing the nutrient contained, but having enzymes specialized enough that could cope with meat and plant at the same time. I thought it all quite intriguing, but nothing concerning. Adelaide arrived on the orbital to little overt fanfare and was dutifully given the tour of facilities, making introductions as they went. The crew badge she wore confirmed a few details which help avoid embarrassment in a mixed-species crew. Adelaide was human, female, aged 41, and had no CSS qualifiers, which didn't seem right. Every species had CSS qualifiers, the little codes that told you what the species in question did or did not require to avoid harm. 2 M383 meant a gelatinous being whose skin layer was corroded by exposure to oils commonly found in most mammalian skin, so don't touch. 3 B012 meant an insectoid who would find it detrimental to be separated from their kind. My own badge had some too, least surprisingly 5L901. Reptilian requires external heat source at regular intervals, as almost all reptilians have. The humans must be still new enough that their qualifiers hadn't finished being reviewed. Again, intriguing, but not alarming. As an example of her species, Adelaide seemed underwhelming, if I'm being honest. Compared to the other species on the orbital, she was below average height, even compared to humans in general, according to the information contained in the summary. She had no bright feathers, no variation in coloring to speak of at all, really. No fine pelt, mostly just a crest of hair which, while looking healthy and neat, wasn't exactly impressive in color or height the way that most mammalians were. Straight white teeth, but no intimidating fangs. Serviceable enough hands and digits, but no claws. And even the musculature was barely worthy of mention, not even close to being imposing. The only feature that really drew attention, and I don't mean this to sound xenophobic, were the eyes. Forward-facing eyes were not unusual in the greater community, having its share of predator-evolved species, but the human's eyes were different even to them. White eyes, with a colored ring and a black spot in the center. The black spot seemed to be the focus of the structure, and you could see it move depending on where it was looking. Again, moving eyes are common enough, but the coloration gave such startling intensity to her gaze. You knew exactly where she was looking, and when she looked into your eyes, it can only be described as unsettling. There was no doubt that the creature in front of you had you in their sights. You felt tracked, evaluated, and pinned to the spot. I almost shudder recalling how it felt that first time seeing those black spots, not being able to shake the feeling that the black spots were somehow drawing you in. But I digress. There was a little get-together planned for the evening meal, but in the meantime I had been voluntold to escort Adelaide to her quarters as they were quite close to my own. Thank you so much. I don't know that I would have been able to find this on my own, but I'm sure it won't take me long to get used to things. You're quite welcome. We were all new once. Pointing out the slate outside the closed door, I was pleased to see Adelaide quickly understand and scan her employee badge, opening the door. I scanned my badge after her and then entered the first room as the lights turned on and habitat controls whirred into life. I took a moment to explain the features of the set of rooms provided to the human. As I suspected, they had not had much experience with commercially built, multi-species capable orbitals. Now, she dropped her shoulder bag by the door, which hit the decking with a heavy thump, and immediately began to tour the room, her hideous eyes darting around, seemingly trying to take in everything at once. I began to reiterate the most important rule of multi-species living, even though it is thoroughly covered by the induction. They should always scan their badge before crossing any threshold within the orbital. As we share the space with so many species, no single habitat settings could encompass everyone. By scanning your badge, it allows the orbital to adjust the room to whatever settings your species requires, and if the room is occupied by a different species already, adjust to a mutually agreeable compromise. We wouldn't want to evaporate a crew member with a 2G024 CSS qualifier by letting them wander into a room with lighting suited for a 3H885 CSS now, would we? Despite my hilarious joke, Adelaide gave no indication that she was listening at all, which I thought was very rude. She was looking through the doorway, touching the walls, even smelling. Ahem, I said we wouldn't. Cutting me off, Adelaide said, Yes, sorry, I was listening, but I'm afraid I'm not 100% on my 3 Series CSS qualifiers. We don't tend to get many insectoid species in our neighborhood. Ah, yes. That explains it then, and quite understandable, really. I replied, I thought, rather graciously. Adelaide continued her inspection, wandering out of sight. I raised my voice slightly. We have a few insectoids in our current roster, so it may be worth looking over the introductory handbook prior to the evening meal. It has all the CSS qualifiers relevant to all the staff you will be working with, and should help you to navigate any potential hazards to yourself. I understand you have no qualifiers listed on your badge currently, so we wouldn't want you to accidentally stumble into an area that may not be viable for you. There are other controls to prevent this, of course. Interrupting again, Adelaide called from what sounded like the bathroom attached to the sleeping quarters. I don't think that should be an issue. How very rude. The guide said nothing about this habit of interrupting. I assure you that safety is always an issue with a multi-species staff, and we take it very seriously. Returning to the entryway, Adelaide replied, "My apologies. I didn't mean to imply any lapse by the executive. I only mean that I don't have any CSS qualifiers. I mean, humans don't, generally. Yes, I'm sure that your people are working very hard to remedy that, but in the meantime, please read the handbook for your own safety." Adelaide, having completed the inspection of her rooms, returned to stand in front of me. Though she had to look up slightly to look me in the eyes, I didn't feel any bigger than her in that moment. Those unsettling eyes felt like they were boring right into my head. "Thank you. I will be sure to read it." With the intense eye contact, it almost felt like a threat. Of course. I will leave you now to rest and refresh and will come back to collect you before the evening meal. It was interesting to meet you, Human Adelaide." She gave a surprisingly charming giggle. "Just Adelaide is fine, and thank you for looking after me on my first day. I look forward to getting to know you and everyone better." Well, perhaps she wasn't all that rude after all. Just a long journey, I'm sure. I bowed slightly and turned to leave, but unfortunately caught my foot on the strap of her hastily dropped bag by the door. The bag didn't move a centimeter, and I was almost thrown to the floor by the sudden absence of inertia. Adelaide must have been walking right behind me, as she was just in time to help steady me, preventing what would have been an inelegant tumble. Though I didn't say it at the time, I felt sure I had, almost literally stumbled upon something I shouldn't have. Adelaide's bag didn't move, but she had carried it into the room. I cannot fathom why, but she must have some powerful magnetic item in her personal bag, which would explain the noise of it thumping earlier as it was attracted to the floor plates. As for why something that powerful and unshielded was in her personal bag as opposed to her research materials, I can only guess. The crates and boxes had all been delivered to her rooms prior to our arrival. Perhaps Adelaide was doing confidential research and couldn't risk someone seeing the object which was hiding in her bag. That would go some way to explaining her non-standard arrival partway through the mission. Regardless, I wasn't going to risk a note on my employee file by sticking my snout where it wasn't required. I gathered up what dignity I could and left for my own rooms, for a cup of relaxing tea and a lie-down. I would ponder this more at some other, less stressful time. Arriving back at the humans' rooms to collect her for the evening meal and welcome get-together, I pressed the chime to alert her to my presence. No answer. It's not unheard of for newcomers to take some time to get used to the chimes, alarms, and various noises which our advanced platform makes, and humans were as new as they come. Still, after waiting some time for acknowledgement, I checked to see if the door was unlocked. I don't make a habit of rudely barging into other people's rooms. It's against company policy, but in this case I felt it was warranted. Who knows what trouble the unsophisticated newcomer had found themselves in, probably stuck in the bathroom. I opened the door and was greeted by not entirely unpleasant noise issuing from the sleeping quarters. There was a rhythmic beat and surprisingly complex melody, so I suspected native human music, which was confirmed by hearing Adelaide add her voice to the composition. Discovering that humans made music and sang was, well, it was rather lovely. These sorts of details are lacking from the functional and succinct summary sheets provided by the executive. I was drawn into the entry room and towards the doorway of the sleeping quarters by the charming song. I certainly didn't intend to sneak or conceal my presence, but I couldn't bring myself to interrupt. I needn't have worried, as the song ended suddenly of its own accord when Adelaide spoke, what sounded to my ears rather harshly. "Tisk, now look what you've done. You couldn't keep the room clean for even a day. Good one, doofus," she grumbled. Oh, she has a visitor already, and it sounds like someone she knows well enough to be this informal with, unless this human is even ruder than I could have ever suspected. Well, I'll get that later. Before I could react, Adelaide appeared in the doorway in front of me. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you come in." she said, smiling innocently. I apologize, but I rang the chime but got no answer and was worried that you might need help. She brushed off my explanation. No worries. I was just getting ready. I'll be with you in a moment. Just need to find where I put my earrings. Adelaide crossed the room and picked up her shoulder bag and dug through it, pulling out 2 pieces of jewelry and holding them up triumphantly in one hand. Found them! She tossed her bag onto a nearby bench seat where it again thumped heavily. Was the magnetic item still in there? It must have been deactivated if she was able to pick it up off the floor so easily. Maybe the other visitor might give a clue as to what this mystery item is. I tried to gain some more information, asking, I didn't realize you knew anyone from the current staff here. I actually don't. It's going to be exciting meeting everyone. Only I heard you speaking with someone just before you came out of your sleeping quarters, so I assumed. Oh no, that was me just talking to myself, sorry. Adelaide replied as if that explained everything. However, it didn't explain everything. It didn't explain anything. I must have misunderstood. Plenty of species talk to themselves. I must not forget my supervisor's birthday. That sort of thing, but I heard you talking to someone else. You said, look what you've done. And you couldn't keep the room clean. You were clearly speaking to someone else. Nope. Just me. An unpleasant thought was creeping up on me. I hope you haven't smuggled another being on board. I read in the summary that you humans are partial to keeping lower life forms as pets. I watched as Adelaide's face changed to what I interpreted as shock or perhaps outrage, and she shot back hotly. I have worked very hard to be here and would never jeopardize that opportunity by breaking the rules like that. Anyway, it would be cruel to keep a pet confined to a couple of rooms like this. I must have let my opinions on keeping animals in your living space show on my features, unhygienic to put it very mildly, as the human continued her diatribe. I don't know what the big deal is. I talk to myself. So what? Yes, I give myself pep talks sometimes. You can do it, Adelaide. Or, he's not worth the bullet. Don't believe what he says. Is it a bit sad? Maybe. But there isn't anything wrong with that. It's perfectly normal. It was becoming clear to me that I needed to start being very careful with my words, as this may be a potentially damaged individual. Please help me understand something. I spoke calmly. When you're giving these pep talks to Adelaide, who is it that is speaking? Me, it's just me, Adelaide. She seemed to sense that this was not a sufficient explanation. Sometimes I talk to past Adelaide like, oh, why did you drink so much? Or future Adelaide, don't you mess up this interview. Or even just a deeper part of myself like, I know you're scared about starting a new job, but you've got this. You know. It was becoming clearer that this person was unhinged and possibly dangerous. No, I'm sorry, but I don't know. This was not making any rational sense. How can there be more than Adelaide? What? No, there is only one, only me, Adelaide. It's not like I have multiple personalities or anything, I just talk to myself. She seemed to lose a bit of the fire that had been heating her words as she sighed and sat down on the bench seat. Sorry, I didn't mean to get upset, it's just, I worked really hard for this posting and it's not started out how I had hoped. She passed her hand over her eyes in a tired gesture. I used to struggle with keeping my thoughts in order when I was younger. They would get away from me when I was stressed, and I would watch as they veered off in unhelpful directions. But I was powerless to stop them even when I knew it was happening. I felt trapped by my own brain, which was awful. I learned a trick, though, to help me calm down when I'm feeling like I'm not in control of myself and need to center myself. So if I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, I sit in front of my mirror, look at myself, like right into my own eyes and try to connect with the Adelaide deep in there, to speak to her, taking that time, to stop dwelling inside my own head and really look out from way back in there. Then I knocked over a stack of books on my dressing table, which is when you heard me telling off my dumb body. I didn't hear the rest of her words. I felt an involuntary shiver run so far up my back it traveled past my neck, prickling and tightening the skin across the top of my head. All my senses were screaming danger, telling me I was facing some indescribable horror. That isn't a person I've been speaking to. That body is not a human. It's some sort of shell, a mockery of life. That isn't the creature called human. The human is deep within it, looking out. I couldn't breathe. I needed to leave right at that moment. Abandoning decorum, I turned and fled the room, not stopping until I was safely back in my own quarters with the doors locked behind me. That thing that you wasn't human. What they present is not them. They are not their bodies. They inhabit them, squatting in their shells like some eldritch creature in a cave, peering out through those nightmare eyes. A burrowing parasite, infesting the flesh and making it walk and talk for them. It's been weeks and I've still not slept a full night through. I'm haunted by thoughts of being trapped or confined in a small space, only being able to look out of tiny black dots. Management won't listen to me anymore when I try to warn them of the imposters, and I think I'm going to be escorted off the orbital with the next roster change. But I cannot bring myself to care. This needs to get out. We've invited horrors into our midst. How can we trust a creature that lives hidden inside another? How can they keep this secret from the galactic community? And why did Adelaide tell me this all so freely? What was her plan? I cannot make sense of it. I fear I'm going mad. I now fear that I am going to turn into one of them, trapped inside my body, cursed to forever look out from the darkness behind my eyes.